The restaurant was buzzing with energy, a mix of clinking cutlery, soft music, and the gentle hum of conversations. It was one of those places where people went not just to eat but to see and be seen. Shiny floors reflected the soft golden lights from above, and the tables were arranged with careful precision. The air smelled faintly of fresh bread and exotic spices. Among the guests, there was one person whose presence seemed to demand attention even before he arrived. A billionaire, known across the region for his wealth and sharp tongue, had entered the restaurant with a small entourage. Everyone turned subtly as he walked by, not because he was loud, but because there was something in his aura, a mix of confidence and arrogance that made people notice. He didn't smile much. His eyes were scanning the room, probably looking for someone or something to impress. Meanwhile, the staff knew he was coming and prepared themselves to offer the best service, knowing that any small mistake could make him angry. At one of the tables near the window, a young waitress was finishing serving another table, her movements precise and careful. She had been working there for a few years and had learned to remain calm and composed no matter who walked in. She adjusted her apron, took a deep breath, and prepared herself for whatever the day might bring. When the billionaire's group was seated, the young waitress approached them with a polite smile. She could feel the tension in the air, a kind of invisible barrier that came from his presence. As she introduced herself and offered the menu, she noticed his eyes barely glanced at her, assessing her like a piece of merchandise rather than a person. She remained unfazed and started describing the specials of the day with her practiced calmness. However, the billionaire was not in the mood for politeness. He leaned back, arms crossed, and made a subtle comment under his breath in Arabic. The words were sharp, intended to belittle and show his supposed superiority. He assumed, as most people did, that she couldn't understand Arabic. He was wrong. The young waitress heard every word clearly, and instead of reacting immediately, she kept her smile, listening carefully to everything he said. Inside, she felt a surge of anger, but it was tempered by her professionalism. She had learned early that letting emotions control her reactions, especially in front of people who thought they were superior, could only make things worse. His words grew slightly louder, as if he was testing the limits of his audacity. He made another insulting comment, this time clearly aimed at her abilities as a waitress. The young woman's fingers tightened slightly around the menu, but her face remained serene. She had seen people like him before, powerful, wealthy, and arrogant. She knew that the right moment to respond was not in the heat of anger but in a calm and strategic way. She took a deep breath and continued to explain the menu, her voice soft but confident. The billionaire's associates looked a little uncomfortable. They had seen their companion act in this way before, but even they were taken aback by the level of rudeness. Yet they said nothing. They were used to staying silent, nodding politely, and letting him have his way. The young waitress sensed their unease but kept her focus on the task at hand. She knew her strength lay in her composure. She would not let his arrogance shake her. She moved to take their orders, noting every small preference and detail with meticulous care. Even as he continued muttering under his breath, she wrote everything down accurately. Her mind was fully alert, processing his words and actions, preparing for the moment when she could turn the tables without causing a scene. She had faced rude customers before, but there was something about this encounter that felt different. He was powerful, yes, but he was also underestimating her completely, and that mistake could work in her favor. As she stepped back to leave, he called her over again. This time, he spoke slightly louder, his words coated in sarcasm. He believed she was unaware of his insult. She paused, keeping her eyes on him, pretending to adjust her apron. While inside, a plan began forming. She had studied Arabic extensively outside of work, a skill she had rarely needed in a professional setting like this, but she had always known that it could be her advantage someday. And that day seemed like the perfect opportunity. She returned to the table, holding herself with grace, and smiled politely. The billionaire leaned forward, perhaps expecting her to be intimidated or to stumble over her words. He didn't know that she was fully aware of every insult, every subtle jab he had made. The staff around them began to notice a subtle change in her demeanor. There was a quiet confidence now, a sense that she was not merely a servant taking orders but someone who could respond with intellect and precision if needed. Meanwhile, the billionaire continued his arrogance, not realizing that he had already lost the subtle battle of underestimation. He made another comment in Arabic, speaking just loud enough for her to hear but quiet enough that others at the table might not catch it. She nodded politely, pretending to jot something down on her notepad, but her mind was alert and calculating. She could sense the exact moment when she could reveal her knowledge and leave him stunned. The tension in the restaurant, though subtle, began to rise. A few other staff members glanced in their direction, sensing the brewing storm. The young waitress, however, remained composed. She was not acting out of anger or revenge. Her motivation was simple: dignity and respect. She would not let his arrogance diminish her professionalism or self-worth. As she walked back to the kitchen to pass the order, she could feel the billionaire's eyes following her. He was confident, perhaps smug, believing that he had successfully intimidated her. What he did not know was that she had everything under control. The small notebook in her hand, the polite smile on her face, and the calm steps she took all masked a mind that was fully aware of the situation and ready to respond in a way that would leave him speechless. That first encounter set the stage for something remarkable. It was a quiet yet powerful moment, where a young woman's patience, intelligence, and inner strength began to challenge the arrogance of a man who was used to being feared and respected. In the bustling, luxurious restaurant, an invisible battle of wit and dignity had begun, one that would soon take an unexpected turn and capture the attention of everyone present. The young waitress returned to the table with the order pad in hand, her calm and steady steps masking the racing thoughts in her mind. She knew the billionaire's arrogance had not gone unnoticed by the other guests or the staff. His entitlement was visible in every glance, every gesture, and she understood that he expected compliance without question. But she also knew that appearances could be deceiving, and the quiet strength she carried within herself was her real advantage. As she carefully took their orders, she continued to maintain a polite and professional tone, never giving away the knowledge that she had understood every insulting remark he had made. The billionaire, satisfied with the surface-level interaction, leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, clearly feeling that he had dominated the situation. He spoke with his usual air of superiority, giving instructions in Arabic, assuming the waitress could not comprehend a single word. But every word, every subtle tone, was crystal clear to her. She wrote down the orders meticulously, her handwriting steady, her smile unwavering. The other staff members observed quietly, sensing the tension between the two. It was a delicate moment. A mistake on anyone's part could escalate it quickly. The young waitress, however, remained focused, her mind alert, and her heart steady. She had encountered difficult customers before, but none with the same sense of entitlement and arrogance as this billionaire. Yet she was not intimidated. She had a quiet confidence that came not from status or wealth but from self-respect and experience. She knew that patience and calm observation could turn the tide in any challenging situation. When she stepped away briefly to relay the orders to the kitchen, she felt the billionaire's gaze follow her. He was accustomed to commanding attention and control, but he did not realize that his underestimation of her had given her a quiet advantage. She paused near the kitchen door, taking a deep breath. Her hands were steady, and her mind was clear. She knew that the moment to respond would come soon, but timing was everything. Rushing or acting out of anger would not serve her. Precision and calmness were the tools she would use. Returning to the table, she carried the tray with the drinks and appetizers, placing them neatly before each guest. The billionaire's expression remained unchanged, but there was a subtle arrogance in the tilt of his head, the smirk at the corner of his mouth, and the way he looked down at her as if he held all the power in the room. She smiled politely, nodding in acknowledgement, never wavering. Her composure was her armor, and she wielded it perfectly. At one point, he made a casual comment in Arabic, loud enough for her to hear clearly, expecting her to react with confusion or hesitation. Instead, she maintained eye contact and simply continued to serve, her gestures calm and deliberate. Inside, her mind was already preparing for a measured response that would shift the balance subtly but unmistakably. She was not reacting impulsively. She was strategizing silently, knowing exactly how and when to reveal her fluency in Arabic. The tension at the table began to grow, though still imperceptible to most other guests. It was a quiet battle, a clash of respect and arrogance, one that relied on wit, perception, and self-control rather than aggression. The billionaire, confident in his assumed superiority, continued to make subtle, insulting remarks in Arabic, testing her patience, as if challenging her to break her calm. She did not. She remained poised, her actions deliberate and her smile steady, giving nothing away. She noticed the body language of the billionaire's associates. They were cautious, aware of the power dynamic, yet uncomfortable with the overt rudeness. Some exchanged glances, unsure how to react. The young waitress sensed their unease but focused solely on her task. She had learned long ago that external validation was not required to maintain dignity and professionalism. Her calmness spoke volumes. It was a silent declaration that she would not be intimidated or diminished. As the meal progressed, she moved around the table with quiet efficiency, attending to their requests with care and precision. Each time the billionaire spoke in Arabic, she nodded politely, pretending to jot notes, but every insult, every jab, was carefully catalogued in her mind. She understood that this moment was about more than taking orders. It was about presence, perception, and control. She held herself with grace, subtly asserting her dignity without confrontation. At one point, he leaned forward, speaking louder in Arabic, clearly trying to assert dominance. The young waitress paused, adjusted her apron, and smiled politely. This brief pause was not hesitation. It was a calculated move. She allowed the moment to stretch just enough for everyone nearby to sense a shift in energy. Her quiet confidence was beginning to challenge the billionaire's assumed superiority, though he remained unaware. It was a subtle, unspoken confrontation that required no loud words, just presence and composure. She then approached the table again, maintaining eye contact and offering assistance with the meals. The billionaire spoke again in Arabic, expecting her to falter or show discomfort. Instead, she replied with a polite, neutral statement in English, continuing to show professionalism. The contrast between his sharp, condescending tone and her calm, collected demeanor created an invisible tension that was noticeable to the attentive staff. They could sense that the young waitress was no ordinary employee, and that she was fully in control of her reactions. The young woman's inner thoughts were a mix of anticipation and confidence. She had studied Arabic outside of work for years, knowing that it might one day be useful. She realized that the moment had arrived. She understood that power was not always about wealth or status. It could also come from knowledge, presence, and the ability to remain composed in challenging situations. Her heart remained steady, and her mind was clear as she prepared for the moment when she would respond. She continued to move gracefully around the table, attending to details, listening carefully, and observing the billionaire's behavior. Every word he spoke, every gesture was noted. She understood that the key to changing the dynamic was timing and subtlety. Acting too soon or too harshly could backfire. Her approach was strategic, relying on calm observation, careful listening, and the right moment to reveal her skill. The staff noticed the subtle shift in energy at the table. The billionaire, though still unaware, was starting to sense a change, a quiet challenge in the way she conducted herself. Her calmness was a gentle but firm assertion of dignity, and it was beginning to disrupt his sense of control. The young waitress, meanwhile, remained completely focused, moving with grace and purpose, never revealing the depth of her knowledge or the full extent of her plan. Finally, as the drinks were refilled and the appetizers placed neatly before each guest, she sensed the perfect moment approaching. The billionaire made another comment in Arabic, this time slightly louder, assuming once again that she did not understand him. She paused for a heartbeat, adjusted her posture, and prepared herself. The restaurant continued its soft hum of activity, unaware that a pivotal moment was about to occur. The young waitress had remained composed, patient, and professional throughout the interaction. And now, she was ready to subtly turn the situation on its head, using knowledge, calmness, and confidence as her weapons. This moment marked the turning point in their silent confrontation. It was no longer just about taking orders or serving meals. It was about respect, dignity, and the quiet strength of a person who refused to be diminished by arrogance. The young waitress's careful observation, strategic patience, and inner confidence had set the stage for what was to come. And in the next moments, the billionaire would face a reality he had never anticipated. One that would leave a lasting impression on everyone at the table and in the restaurant. The restaurant seemed to slow down slightly in the young waitress's mind as she approached the billionaire's table one more time. The air around them was filled with polite conversation from other tables, clinking cutlery, and soft music. But for her, everything narrowed to the table in front of her. She had listened, observed, and waited patiently for this moment. Every word he had spoken in Arabic, every small insult, had been recorded carefully in her mind. Now it was time to respond, and she knew that the impact would be greater if done calmly, without haste or aggression. She adjusted her apron and took a deep, steadying breath. Her hands were perfectly still as she placed the last plate before one of the guests, all while keeping her eyes on the billionaire. There was a calm in her gaze, a quiet confidence that was almost invisible but palpable to anyone who looked closely. She could sense the slight shift in the billionaire's demeanor, though he was unaware of the reason. He continued to speak in Arabic, assuming she would not understand him, each word dripping with arrogance. She waited a moment, letting him finish his sentence. Then, with a calm voice and perfect fluency in Arabic, she replied. Her words were polite, measured, and precise, but the meaning was clear. She addressed his insults with dignity, turning his arrogance into quiet acknowledgement of her intelligence. The billionaire froze, his mouth slightly open, unable to process what had just happened. His eyes widened in surprise, a mix of disbelief and embarrassment. He had assumed ignorance, but the waitress had shattered that assumption effortlessly. The other staff and nearby patrons noticed the sudden change in the atmosphere. The quiet confidence in her voice had captured everyone's attention. No one had expected such a response, and the billionaire, who had relied on intimidation, was now the one momentarily intimidated. The young waitress, however, remained composed, her demeanor unchanged. She had achieved exactly what she had intended, to assert her intelligence and professionalism without aggression, simply by revealing a skill he had assumed she did not possess. For a moment, the billionaire's associates exchanged subtle glances. They were surprised, unsure how to respond. They had seen their companion display arrogance before, but this confrontation was different. The young waitress had not shouted or argued. She had simply spoken in a way that showed mastery, control, and confidence. The lesson was clear, and the billionaire was experiencing it firsthand. He could no longer rely on wealth or intimidation. He had been outmaneuvered quietly, respectfully, and decisively. The young waitress continued to engage with the table, taking further requests and serving meals, all while maintaining eye contact and calmness. Every gesture, every movement, reinforced her presence and intelligence. She had turned what could have been a tense and humiliating situation into one where she was in control without even raising her voice. The billionaire attempted to speak again, but his words faltered, his confidence shaken. For the first time, he faced someone who would not bow to his arrogance, someone who had the skills and the composure to match his status in a different, subtler way. She noticed the reactions of the other patrons as well. Some were watching discreetly, intrigued by the quiet power unfolding at the table. The way she handled herself became a silent lesson on confidence, skill, and respect. She was not seeking attention, but her presence and intellect could not be ignored. The contrast between her calm demeanor and the billionaire's previously unquestioned arrogance created a subtle but powerful tension that filled the space. The billionaire, still processing what had just occurred, found himself hesitant to continue his usual behavior. The usual arrogance that defined his interactions was now subdued by the realization that his assumptions had been entirely wrong. He had underestimated someone based on appearance and status, and the waitress's quiet intelligence had exposed that misjudgment. His associates, though loyal, were equally aware of the shift, realizing that their companion was now navigating uncharted territory. Throughout the meal, the waitress maintained her professionalism. She continued to take orders, refill drinks, and respond to requests with precision and care. Her fluency in Arabic had not been used to humiliate but to assert dignity and equality. She had turned an awkward, potentially confrontational situation into a demonstration of calm, composed strength. Each movement, each word, conveyed confidence and awareness, ensuring that she remained in control while maintaining a respectful atmosphere. The billionaire, humbled yet silent, began to observe her more closely. For the first time, he noticed her attentiveness, the careful way she managed the table, and the quiet intelligence behind her polite smile. This was not someone who could be dismissed with wealth or status. He realized that respect had to be earned and that arrogance alone would not suffice in dealing with individuals of skill and dignity. The young waitress had shown him a new perspective through quiet mastery rather than confrontation. As the meal continued, subtle changes became apparent. The billionaire spoke less arrogantly, choosing his words more carefully. He observed the waitress with a sense of respect, though it was mixed with lingering embarrassment. The young woman continued her work, unfazed by his presence, maintaining her calm demeanor. She had successfully shifted the dynamic without any aggression or drama, demonstrating the power of skill, patience, and confidence. In moments of pause, she reflected quietly on the situation. She recognized that encounters like this were rare but powerful. A person's dignity and intelligence could stand against arrogance, and in this case, it had reshaped the interaction entirely. Her fluency in Arabic had been the tool, but it was her calm, strategic approach that had made the difference. She understood that true strength was in composure, knowledge, and the ability to act decisively when the time was right. The staff continued their duties, watching discreetly, inspired by the young waitress's handling of the situation. They saw firsthand that professionalism, confidence, and intelligence could command respect even in the presence of someone as imposing as a billionaire. The subtle shift in energy was noticeable. The arrogant air that had once dominated the table was replaced with a quiet acknowledgement of her capability. She had earned respect through action and poise rather than confrontation or force. The meal drew to a close, and the young waitress prepared the table for the final moments of service. She refilled the last drinks, cleared the empty plates, and maintained polite conversation with the associates when necessary. The billionaire's earlier confidence had been replaced with contemplation. He had been confronted not with aggression but with competence, and the experience left a lasting impression. The young waitress had achieved her goal of asserting dignity, respect, and intelligence in a situation where she had initially been underestimated. As she brought the final bill and prepared to step away, the billionaire remained seated, silently acknowledging the subtle lessons of the encounter. Her presence had shifted the dynamic of the table, revealing the importance of perception, patience, and strategic action. The young waitress had demonstrated that power was not always in wealth or status. Sometimes it resided quietly in skill, knowledge, and composure. She had faced arrogance with calm, turning what could have been a humiliating experience into a demonstration of quiet mastery. This pivotal moment left everyone at the table and nearby staff aware of the shift. The billionaire, humbled and reflective, could not ignore the skill and intelligence that had challenged his assumptions. The young waitress returned to the kitchen, her steps steady, her mind calm, and her heart proud. She had navigated a delicate situation with grace, turning a moment of potential humiliation into one of empowerment. And in the restaurant, the atmosphere subtly changed as her quiet strength resonated. A reminder that true respect was earned through intelligence, composure, and dignity rather than wealth or arrogance. After the moment when the waitress spoke Arabic fluently, the atmosphere at the table changed completely. The billionaire, who had been arrogant and condescending, froze in disbelief. He had underestimated her, assuming that her role as a waitress limited her abilities. Now, he was forced to confront the reality that his assumptions were wrong. The young woman's calm, confident tone and precise words had not only communicated her understanding but had also commanded respect without aggression. The power dynamic had shifted subtly, yet undeniably, in her favor. The other staff members and nearby patrons began to notice the change. Whispers of admiration and surprise floated quietly around the room. They were seeing a display of dignity and intelligence in action, and it was clear that the billionaire, despite his wealth and status, had been humbled. The waitress continued to carry out her duties with grace, serving drinks, refilling water glasses, and ensuring that the food arrived at the table perfectly. Her every movement reinforced her professionalism and calm authority. The billionaire attempted to speak again, trying to regain some of the control he had lost. However, his voice was cautious now, lacking the previous arrogance. He realized that any further insult could backfire. The young waitress responded with polite attentiveness, maintaining her composure while acknowledging his requests. Her fluency in Arabic was no longer just a skill. It had become a symbol of her intelligence, patience, and ability to remain unshaken under pressure. She had turned his arrogance into a lesson in humility without ever raising her voice. As she attended to the table, the billionaire's associates exchanged glances, clearly impressed. They had seen him dominate conversations countless times, but this situation was different. Here was someone who matched him in understanding and composure, and who could challenge his assumptions quietly and respectfully. The young waitress moved around the table, placing the final dishes carefully and ensuring that everything was exactly as the guests wanted. Her calm presence made the billionaire pause and observe, a rare moment of reflection for someone used to being in control. Throughout the meal, she maintained her professionalism, answering questions about the dishes and offering suggestions when appropriate. Every interaction reinforced her dignity and competence. The billionaire, who had come expecting deference, was now compelled to recognize her abilities. His initial reaction of shock gradually transformed into quiet respect. He understood that her actions were not out of defiance but were rooted in skill, intelligence, and self-respect. The power of composure and knowledge had completely changed the dynamic at the table. At one point, the young waitress noticed a subtle change in his expression. There was an acknowledgement in his eyes, a silent understanding that he had been wrong to assume she could be underestimated. He was no longer the commanding figure he had been when he entered. Instead, he was observing, reflecting, and perhaps even learning. The waitress had achieved something remarkable. She had turned an uncomfortable, potentially humiliating encounter into a moment of quiet empowerment. Her calmness and skill did not go unnoticed by the other guests in the restaurant. Some watched discreetly, recognizing the tension and transformation at the table. The contrast between the billionaire's initial arrogance and her composed response was striking. It was a demonstration of how dignity, knowledge, and patience could command respect far more effectively than wealth or status. The young waitress moved through the room with quiet confidence, every action deliberate and poised. As the meal progressed, the billionaire began to speak less aggressively. His tone softened, and he chose his words with care. He had been humbled by the young woman's quiet strength and intelligence. Her actions had shown him that true power could come from knowledge, composure, and dignity, not just money and influence. The staff continued their duties, inspired by the young waitress's handling of the situation. They observed her ability to maintain professionalism while subtly asserting control and respect. At one point, the waitress approached the billionaire with a gentle smile, asking if everything was to his satisfaction. Her voice was calm, confident, and respectful. He hesitated before responding, clearly reflecting on the earlier confrontation. Her presence and composure had created an unspoken shift in authority. He realized that her professionalism and intelligence had earned her a place of respect in that room, something he had not expected or prepared for. Throughout the remainder of the meal, she continued to manage the table with skill and grace. Every detail, from the placement of utensils to the refilling of drinks, was handled with care. Her fluency in Arabic remained a quiet reminder to the billionaire that he could not assume superiority based solely on wealth or status. The subtle power she wielded through calmness, precision, and intellect was more impactful than any confrontation could have been. By the time the meal was nearly finished, the atmosphere at the table had shifted completely. The billionaire's demeanor had softened, and there was a sense of quiet acknowledgement in his eyes. He no longer spoke condescendingly but observed respectfully. The young waitress had achieved a remarkable balance. She had maintained her dignity, upheld professionalism, and subtly challenged arrogance without creating conflict or drama. Her actions were a lesson in the power of composure, skill, and quiet confidence. As the final dishes were cleared and the bill presented, the young waitress maintained her calm, respectful demeanor. The billionaire, now reflecting on the encounter, realized that he had underestimated her from the very beginning. She had not only met the challenge but had exceeded expectations through patience, knowledge, and dignity. Her ability to handle the situation with such poise left a lasting impression on everyone at the table, including him. When she finally stepped away to return to her other duties, the billionaire remained seated, quietly acknowledging the subtle lessons he had received. The young waitress had transformed what could have been a humiliating or tense encounter into a moment of empowerment and respect. Her actions had demonstrated that intelligence, composure, and skill could command respect even from the most arrogant individuals. The staff and other patrons in the restaurant had witnessed a display of quiet strength that was both inspiring and memorable. This moment marked a turning point, not only for the billionaire but for everyone observing the interaction. The young waitress had shown that true respect was earned through knowledge, patience, and dignity, rather than wealth, status, or arrogance. She had turned the tables, so to speak, in a way that left a lasting impression without causing conflict or humiliation. Her calm, confident actions served as a reminder that intelligence and composure could be more powerful than money and influence. As she moved through the restaurant, attending to other guests with the same care and attention, she carried with her the quiet satisfaction of having handled a difficult situation with grace. The billionaire, meanwhile, remained reflective, perhaps reconsidering how he approached others and how easily assumptions could be misleading. The young waitress had not only earned his respect but had also demonstrated the power of patience, skill, and dignity in a way that would be remembered long after the meal ended. The meal had ended, and the young waitress was clearing the last of the dishes with calm efficiency. Her movements were smooth and deliberate, a reflection of the composure that had carried her through the tense interaction with the billionaire. The atmosphere at the table had completely shifted from the arrogance and tension at the beginning to quiet respect and acknowledgement. The billionaire, who had entered the restaurant expecting deference, now sat in thoughtful silence, a noticeable change in his demeanor. The young waitress had completed her duties with grace, ensuring that every detail was perfect. From the placement of utensils to the precise timing of the food delivery, she had maintained professionalism throughout. The billionaire's associates watched quietly, clearly impressed by her skill and composure. They had witnessed something rare, an encounter where intellect, patience, and dignity had prevailed over arrogance and entitlement. The young woman had demonstrated that respect could be earned, not demanded, and that true strength came from knowledge, confidence, and self-control. As she returned to the side of the restaurant to attend to other guests, she reflected briefly on the experience. Despite the initial intimidation and the billionaire's rudeness, she had remained calm and focused. She had chosen her responses carefully, ensuring that she asserted her intelligence without creating conflict. This approach had not only shifted the power dynamic at the table but had also set an example for her colleagues and anyone observing the interaction. Her actions had spoken louder than any words, demonstrating the power of professionalism and composure in the face of arrogance. The billionaire remained seated for a few more moments, quietly observing the young waitress from a distance. The realization of his misjudgment was evident on his face. He had assumed that she could be easily intimidated and underestimated her abilities completely. That assumption had been proven wrong, and the experience left a lasting impression. He now recognized that intelligence, skill, and self-respect could command respect in ways that wealth and power alone could not. The young waitress continued her work throughout the restaurant, interacting with other guests and staff with the same calm professionalism. Her actions were deliberate, precise, and respectful, reinforcing the dignity she had maintained throughout the encounter. Observing staff noted how her composure had influenced the atmosphere of the restaurant, creating an environment of respect and admiration. Patrons who had witnessed the interaction were also quietly impressed, understanding that they had seen an example of quiet strength and intelligence in action. As the billionaire prepared to leave, he called over the young waitress. This time, his tone was measured and polite, lacking any trace of arrogance. He acknowledged her skill and professionalism with a simple, genuine compliment. Though brief, the gesture was significant, marking a shift in the dynamic from confrontation to respect. The young woman accepted the acknowledgement with grace, maintaining her composure and polite demeanor. There was no need for dramatic gestures or words. Her consistent professionalism had spoken for itself. Her colleagues and other staff members noticed the subtle acknowledgement. They recognized the courage and intelligence it took to handle such a situation with calm and dignity. The young waitress had managed to transform a potentially humiliating encounter into a moment of empowerment and respect, leaving a lasting impression on everyone involved. The billionaire's recognition, though understated, validated her approach and reinforced the idea that true respect was earned through knowledge, composure, and professionalism. After the billionaire and his group departed, the young waitress returned to her duties, reflecting on the experience with quiet satisfaction. She had navigated a difficult and high-pressure situation without compromising her values or professionalism. The lessons of patience, strategic thinking, and the power of calm composure were reinforced through this encounter. Her ability to handle arrogance with grace and intelligence had left a lasting impact not only on the billionaire but also on the staff and patrons who had observed the interaction. In the days that followed, the story of the encounter quietly spread among the restaurant staff and regular patrons. It became a source of inspiration, highlighting how confidence, skill, and dignity could command respect even in challenging situations. The young waitress continued her work with the same dedication, knowing that the encounter had strengthened her confidence and reaffirmed the value of professionalism. Her example served as a reminder that true power often comes from inner strength, knowledge, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. The billionaire, meanwhile, carried the memory of the encounter with him. Though he rarely encountered situations that challenged his assumptions, this experience had left a mark. He had been reminded that wealth and status could not replace respect, intelligence, and dignity. The young waitress's calm and confident response had taught him a subtle but powerful lesson about humility and the importance of acknowledging skill and professionalism in others. For the young waitress, the encounter reinforced the importance of staying true to oneself, even in the face of arrogance and intimidation. She had relied on her knowledge, patience, and composure to navigate a challenging situation, and the outcome had demonstrated the value of these qualities. Her ability to remain calm and confident, even when underestimated, had allowed her to assert her dignity and command respect in a meaningful way. The impact of the encounter extended beyond the immediate interaction. Colleagues were inspired by her example, recognizing the power of composure, intelligence, and professionalism. Patrons who had observed the interaction left with a quiet admiration, understanding the subtle strength it took to handle such a situation effectively. And the billionaire, humbled and reflective, gained a new appreciation for skill, dignity, and the power of knowledge over arrogance. In the end, the young waitress had demonstrated that true respect is earned through actions, patience, and intelligence. She had transformed a potentially uncomfortable and challenging situation into a lesson in dignity and composure, leaving a lasting impression on everyone involved. Her calm, confident, and professional approach had not only earned her recognition and respect but had also created a powerful example of how to handle arrogance and entitlement with grace and intelligence. As she continued her work in the restaurant, she carried with her the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had faced a challenging situation with integrity and skill. The encounter would remain a defining moment, a story of quiet strength, patience, and the ability to command respect without aggression or confrontation. It was a reminder that true power comes not from wealth or status, but from knowledge, composure, and the courage to stand firm in one's dignity.